When I told my roommate her boyfriend had been arrested for assault, she said, "Can you imagine someone telling you that assault is a disease?" That's what my roommate, Madison, said the day I told her boyfriend, Jake, had been arrested for beating up a bartender. She just stood there holding his hand, looking at me like I was the crazy one. "You think I'm going to abandon him just because he has a disease?" she asked, rolling her eyes. And I just stared, absolutely flabbergasted, and said, "Madison, assault isn't a disease." But she wasn't hearing it. Not when Jake, fresh out on bail, stood there beside her, a smug smirk playing on his lips. She pulled him inside, ignoring the fact that I'd explicitly told her he wasn't allowed in our apartment after what he'd done. "You're so ignorant about mental health conditions," she lectured me like I was a child. "Anger management disorder is a real disease." Jake just chuckled behind her. Then Haley, our other roommate, walked out of her room, saw Jake, and immediately recoiled. "Madison, why is he here?" "We voted. He's banned from the apartment." Madison actually laughed, dragging Jake to the couch. "You can't discriminate against someone for having a medical condition. That's literally illegal." Jake, making himself right at home, propped his feet on our coffee table, knocking over Haley's textbooks. "Besides," Madison added, "the charges were dropped." But I knew that was a lie. I'd checked the court records myself that morning. No, they weren't. He has a hearing next Tuesday. Madison just waved her hand dismissively. The bartender provoked him by cutting him off. That's basically assault on the bartender's part. Jake nodded along, eating it up. "Exactly, babe." He triggered my condition by refusing to serve me. He looked at me then, a chilling, threatening smile twisting his face. "Some people just don't understand invisible disabilities." I pulled out my phone, ready to show her the police report, the cold, hard facts. "He broke the guy's nose and gave him a concussion." "That's not a disability, Madison, that's violence." She snatched my phone, deleted the file, and then glared at me. "Stop spreading ableist propaganda. Would you shame someone for having diabetes?" Finally, Haley found her voice again. "Madison, he also has a restraining order from his ex-girlfriend." Madison's face lit up, like this somehow proved her point. "See? Another woman who couldn't handle dating someone with a medical condition. The stigma is disgusting." Jake leaned back, spreading out even more on our couch. "My ex was ableist, too. She called the cops just because I had an episode." Madison rubbed his arm, full of fake sympathy. "People don't understand that violence is just a symptom, like sneezing or coughing." I just stood there, utterly speechless. I knew Jake pushed his ex down a flight of stairs. "He pushed his ex down a flight of stairs, Madison." I practically shouted. She stood up, angry now. "He didn't mean to. His condition makes him lose control sometimes." She stomped into the kitchen, already pulling out our groceries to make Jake some food. "You wouldn't blame someone with Tourette's for cursing, would you?" Jake followed her, opening our fridge and grabbing Haley's labeled lunch. "This looks good," he mumbled, starting to eat it straight from the container. "Jake, that's mine," Haley said, but he just ignored her. Madison handed him more of our food. "He needs to keep his blood sugar stable. It helps with his episodes." She glared at us both. "If you two were supportive roommates, you'd understand." Just then, Mrs. Aleman, our 75-year-old neighbor, knocked on the door. I opened it, and she looked terrified. "Is that man back? The one who was yelling last week?" Before I could answer, Jake appeared behind me, menacing. "You got a problem, lady?" Mrs. Aleman took a frantic step back. "Please don't let him near my apartment. I'm scared." Madison pushed past me, full of righteous indignation. "How dare you discriminate against him? He has a medical condition." Mrs. Aleman looked utterly confused. "Medical condition?" "He threatened to break my door down because my TV was too loud at 4 p.m. Madison got right in her face. "That's a symptom of his sensitivity disorder. Loud noises trigger him." Jake gave Mrs. Aleman that same creepy smile, making her back away even further. "Maybe you should be more considerate of people with disabilities." Mrs. Aleman practically ran back to her apartment, and I heard her deadbolt click into place. Madison spun on me, venom in her eyes. Look what you've done. You've turned the whole building against him. She stormed back inside, pulling my photos off the wall. We need to make this a safe space for Jake. She threw my pictures into a box. These might trigger his episodes. Haley grabbed her purse, her voice tight with panic. I'm staying at my boyfriend's tonight. This is insane. Madison blocked her path. You're really going to abandon us because Jake has a disease? What if he had cancer? Haley shoved past her. Cancer doesn't give people black eyes, Madison. After Haley left, Madison got even worse. Jake's moving in. He needs a supportive environment for his recovery. I just laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. Recovery from what?
He's not sick.
He's violent. Jake shot up off the couch, his fists clenched, his face dark. You calling me violent? Madison jumped between us, frantically. Don't trigger him. You know what happens when his condition flares up. She actually said this, like it would be my fault if he hit me. If he touches me, I said, my voice shaking. I'm calling the cops. Jake stepped closer. Your roommate seems pretty mad already. Maybe she needs medication. Madison gasped, practically giddy. You're right, baby. She probably has the same condition, but undiagnosed. She looked at me with fake concern. Your anger about Jake is actually a symptom. You should get tested. That's when Rick, our landlord, walked in. I'd texted him earlier, hoping he'd use his key. He just stood there looking at Jake. Jake Huffman, you're not on the lease, and you're not welcome here. Rick pulled out his phone, holding it up, already dialing. Madison's crying turned to full-blown panic as she grabbed his arm. Jake stayed on the couch, but his whole body went rigid, coiled, and ready to spring. Rick shook Madison off and finished dialing. She threw herself between Rick and Jake, screaming about how Jake had nowhere to go, how stress was dangerous for his condition. She kept repeating vulnerable over and over, like it was a magic word that would make Rick put his phone down. Rick held the phone to his ear. Jake stood up, agonizingly slow, his fists still clenched. He stared at Rick without blinking, for what felt like an eternity. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The silence was suffocating. Finally, Jake walked toward the door, but he moved like a predator choosing to leave, not one being forced out. He stopped right next to me, so close I could smell the stale beer on his breath. He leaned in and whispered, so quiet only I could hear, "This isn't over." Then he walked out and slammed the door, hard enough to rattle the last remaining pictures on the wall. Madison ran after him, but Rick blocked her path. She screamed, trying to push past him, but he stood there, solid as a wall. Rick put his phone away, looking at Madison with deep disappointment. He told her she was breaking her lease by having Jake stay here. If Jake came back even once, Rick would start eviction proceedings. Madison's face went from tears to pure, blazing rage. She started screaming about discrimination and disabilities and lawsuits. She'd call a lawyer, she swore, and sue Rick for everything he had. Rick just shook his head and walked out. The door clicked shut and Madison turned on me. The look in her eyes made me stumble backward. I ruined everything, she snarled. I destroyed her relationship and Jake's recovery, and now he might never get better, and it was all my fault. Her voice grew louder, more frantic, until she was screaming at me. Then she stormed to her room and slammed the door so hard a picture fell off the wall in the hallway. I heard her on the phone immediately, her voice muffled, but I caught Jake's name and words like, "Come back," and "when he's gone," and "we'll figure it out." My hands were shaking as I texted Haley. I told her everything. Rick and the police, Jake leaving, Madison losing it. Haley responded in under a minute. She said she was staying at her boyfriend's place for the rest of the week, maybe longer. She didn't feel safe coming back with Madison acting crazy and Jake threatening to return. I typed back that I understood, and I didn't blame her. But now I was alone in the apartment with Madison, who clearly hated me. I went to my room, locked the door, and pushed my heavy dresser in front of it. I tried to do homework, but every sound made me jump. I heard Madison moving around, in the kitchen, pacing the hallway. Around midnight, I tried to sleep, but I kept waking up, the building settling, a car outside, Madison's footsteps. Around 3 a.m., my heart nearly stopped. I heard the apartment door open. Then Jake's voice, quiet, talking with Madison in the living room. I couldn't make out the words, but it was him. I froze in bed, barely breathing. I heard them out there for what felt like hours. Finally, exhaustion must have claimed me, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through my window. I pushed the dresser away, as quietly as I could, and opened my door a crack. I crept down the hallway. Jake was asleep on our couch, Madison curled up next to him. My textbooks, which had been neatly stacked, were scattered on the floor. I went to the kitchen. Every single thing Haley and I had labeled with our names was gone. Empty containers sat in the sink. They had eaten everything. I pulled out my phone, took photos of Jake on the couch, making sure the timestamp, 7 a.m., was visible. Then I photographed the empty fridge, the mess in the living room. I sent everything to Rick with a message. Jake came back last night and has been here for hours. 10 minutes later, Rick texted back. He was coming over. And he was bringing the police. I went back to my room and got dressed fast. I heard Madison and Jake starting to wake up, their voices getting louder. I stayed in my room until I heard the knocking at the front door. I opened my bedroom door to see Madison jumping up from the couch. Rick stood in the doorway with a police officer, badge reading Conway. Rick pointed at Jake. This is the guy who wasn't allowed here. Madison started talking a mile a minute, claiming Jake had just gotten here 5 minutes ago, and she was about to make him leave. Officer Conway looked at me. I held up my phone, showing him the time-stamped photos from over an hour ago. Conway asked Madison if she understood she was lying to a police officer. Madison's face went white. Jake stood up, trying to casually walk toward the door like he was just going to leave. Officer Conway stepped in front of him. Wait. He pulled out his radio, called in Jake's name. We all stood there in an awful silence. Finally, the radio crackled. Bail violation. Conway looked at Jake. You violated your bail conditions by being at this apartment after Rick banned you yesterday. Jake started to argue, but Conway was already pulling out handcuffs. Turn around. Hands behind your back. Jake looked at Madison, desperate, like she could save him, but she just stood there, frozen. Conway cuffed Jake right there, in our living room, reading him his rights. Madison lunged at me, hands reaching for my face, but Officer Conway stepped between us, grabbing her shoulders. She twisted, screaming that I was a monster who didn't understand real medical conditions. Tears streamed down her face as she yelled that Jake needed treatment, not jail. Conway told her to calm down, or he'd have to restrain her. 2. She kept screaming that I was sending an innocent, sick person to jail, that I was the most ableist person she'd ever met. Jake watched from the doorway in handcuffs, a weird smile on his face, like he enjoyed seeing Madison defend him even now. Officer Conway finally had to physically push Madison back toward the couch, warning her to stop or she'd be arrested for interfering. She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing, shouting that this was all my fault. Rick stood near the door, uncomfortable but determined. Officer Conway led Jake out of the apartment. I heard Jake tell Madison he loved her, that this would all work out. Madison screamed back that she loved him too and would wait for him. The door closed, and the apartment fell silent, save for Madison's broken sobs. Rick pulled a folded paper from his jacket. He handed it to Madison. This is a formal lease violation notice. You have 48 hours to prove Jake won't return or face immediate eviction. Madison snatched it, mascara running down her face. She read it for maybe 5 seconds before tearing it into pieces and throwing them at Rick. The scraps scattered across the floor. Rick's face remained calm. That won't change anything. I have copies and they'll be filed. Madison stood up, nose to nose with him. You can't do this to me. Rick stepped back. You've violated the lease multiple times. Jake threatened other tenants and created an unsafe environment. Madison screamed about discrimination and disability, about suing him and the whole building. Rick just shook his head. The notice stands. 2 days to comply. He looked at me. Are you okay? I nodded, even though I wasn't. Call me if anything else happens. Then he left. As soon as the door closed, Madison turned on me again. I ruined everything. I destroyed her relationship with the only person who truly understood her. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. She stormed to her room, slamming the door so hard another picture fell. I heard her on the phone immediately, muffled, but I knew she was talking to Jake. My hands shook. I pulled out my phone and called my parents. My mom answered, worried. I told her everything. Her voice rose with panic. You need to come home right now. You can finish the semester online. I explained I only had 2 months left. My classes required in-person attendance. I couldn't just abandon everything. My mom started crying, saying she couldn't sleep knowing I was in danger. My dad got on the phone, calmer, but I could hear the worry beneath. He asked specific questions about Jake's history, the restraining order, how Jake pushed his ex downstairs and broke her arm. My dad was quiet for a minute. Then he said, you need to get a restraining order against Jake yourself. He explained Jake would eventually get out and might come after me. That made my stomach clench. He was right. My dad looked up the courthouse info, telling me I could file for a temporary order tomorrow morning. He'd pay for a lawyer if needed, but they usually had advocates. I wrote everything down. He made me promise to go first thing, keep my phone charged, always with me. My mom begged again, but I assured her I'd be okay. I'd call after I filed. After we hung up, I sat on my bed, utterly exhausted. Around 6 p.m., a hard knock on the door. Through the peephole, an older couple I didn't recognize. The woman looked furious, the man tired. I opened the door, chain still on. The woman immediately started yelling, you're the roommate who got Jake arrested. Madison's parents. I unhooked the chain. She pushed past me into the apartment. Madison came out of her room, ran to her mom, crying. Her mom hugged her, saying how terrible this all was, how I destroyed everything. Madison's dad, looking apologetic, stood near the door. Madison's mom kept shouting, calling Jake a good man with a medical condition, how I'd thrown him in jail like a criminal. Jake is a criminal. I shot back. He assaulted someone and violated his bail. That just made her angrier. Madison's dad finally spoke up. Can I talk to you privately? He guided me to the kitchen. His whole face changed. Exhausted, worried. He quietly said he was sorry for his wife and daughter. He'd been worried about Madison and Jake for months, but no one would listen. Jake had been controlling Madison, isolating her. He tried to talk to Madison, but she wouldn't hear it. His wife thought Jake was just passionate, misunderstood, but he knew better. He asked me to be patient while they tried to get Madison to see reason, said they'd get her into therapy, help her understand Jake was dangerous. I told him I appreciated it, but Madison had 48 hours to prove Jake wouldn't come back, or she'd be evicted. He looked pained. I understand. I'll work on it. We went back to the living room. Madison's mom was still telling Madison everything would be okay, that Jake clearly loved her. Sometimes men with strong personalities just need understanding women who can handle their intensity, she was saying. Jake obviously cared deeply about Madison, or he wouldn't get so emotional. Madison was nodding, wiping tears. Weak women can't handle men like Jake, but Madison is strong enough to see past his rough exterior. Madison's dad tried to interrupt. That's not healthy relationship advice. But his wife waved him off. Your own father had a temper when we first got married, but I learned how to manage it, and now we have a wonderful marriage. Madison's dad's face went red. That's not true. You're rewriting history. Madison's mom ignored him, continuing to Madison. Real love means accepting someone's flaws. If you abandon Jake now, you'll regret it forever. Madison's dad raised his voice. Jake is violent and dangerous. Madison needs to stay away from him. The argument between Madison's parents escalated until, finally, Madison's dad said they needed to leave. After they left, the apartment was eerily quiet. Madison went back to her room without a word. I heard her moving around. About an hour later, she came out with a duffel bag, stuffed with clothes. I'm moving in with Jake's friend, she announced. because we've all made her feel unwelcome in her own home. I asked which friend, and she snapped. It doesn't matter. At least they understand what Jake's going through. She said she'd still pay her portion of the rent, but she wasn't staying here anymore. I didn't try to stop her. Honestly, I was relieved. She grabbed a few more things, then turned at the door. You'll regret this someday, when you realize what you've done. Then she was gone. I locked the door, feeling this strange mix of relief and worry. Glad she was gone, but scared for her, living with Jake's friends, who probably thought just like Madison. I texted Haley. Madison moved out. It's safe to come back. Haley responded in minutes. Be there in an hour. I called Rick, told him what happened, and asked if we could change the locks. Rick said absolutely, and he'd be there tomorrow morning with new ones. He asked if Madison had taken her key. I didn't know, but probably. He said he'd change them anyway, just to be safe. When Haley got back, she looked so relieved. We talked all evening making plans. Haley said her boyfriend's roommate might want Madison's room. I told her about the restraining order I was filing tomorrow, and she said she'd come with me. We ordered pizza, watched stupid movies, trying to relax. But I kept thinking about Madison, about Jake, and what might happen next. That night, I barely slept again. The next morning, Haley and I went to the courthouse right when it opened. I found the clerk's office, explained I needed to file a temporary restraining order. She handed me a stack of forms, and I wrote down everything. Jake threatening me, his pattern of violence with his ex, the bartender, the assault conviction. The clerk reviewed my forms. She said a judge would review it today, and if approved, I'd get a temporary order for 2 weeks until a full hearing. It would be served to Jake in jail. I waited in the courtroom lobby for almost 2 hours. The building was old, cold, the plastic chairs uncomfortable. Other people around me, some crying. I checked my phone, no messages. Finally, a bailiff called my name and Jake's full name. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. The judge, an older woman with gray hair, looked at me, pointed to a chair. I sat. The bailiff handed her my paperwork. She read, her expression growing more serious with each page. She looked up. Stand and raise your right hand. I swore to tell the truth. She asked me questions about what happened with Jake. I told her about the threats, his clenched fists, how he violated the ban immediately, about his ex-girlfriend's restraining order, the assault case. She kept writing notes. Had he ever physically touched me? No, but he had threatened me multiple times. Did I feel afraid? Yes, absolutely. The whole thing took maybe 15 minutes. When I finished, the judge looked back at my paperwork, reread Jake's criminal history. She shook her head slightly, stamped something. She looked at me. I am granting the temporary restraining order, effective immediately, for 2 weeks. Jake would be served in jail, notified to stay at least 500 feet away. If he violated it, he'd face additional criminal charges. I thanked her. She nodded. Next case. I walked out feeling a huge wave of relief. At least now there was something official, even if it was just a piece of paper. I drove home, taking my usual route. The sun was setting, everything looked normal. I pulled into the apartment parking lot, and my stomach dropped. Someone had keyed my car on both sides, deep scratches through the paint. On the driver's side, snitch in huge letters. On the passenger side, again, fresh, bright silver against my dark blue. I stared, feeling sick. I called Officer Conway. He said he'd be there in 10 minutes. I waited, taking photos of the damage. Conway arrived, walked around my car, took his own photos. When had I last seen it undamaged? This morning, going to the courthouse. He wrote it down. Any idea who? Probably one of Jake's friends. Jake's still in jail. Conway nodded. That's my thought, too. He said Jake's bail had been revoked. He was still in county jail for the assault trial. But his friends were angry. Conway filled out a vandalism report, gave me a copy for insurance. He suggested I park in a different spot, vary my routine. They might be watching. He'd increase patrols. After he left, I went inside, locked the door. I felt violated, angry. That night, I couldn't sleep. I opened my laptop, searched for Jake online. News articles about his arrest, then court records from 2 years ago. His ex-girlfriend's restraining order petition. Her name was blacked out, but the details were all there. Charming at first, then jealous, controlling. Checking her phone, getting angry if she talked to other guys. Showing up at her work. When she tried to break up, he'd cry, apologize, promise to change. The violence started small, grabbing her arm too hard, pushing. Then one night, arguing at the top of stairs. She told him to leave. He shoved her. She fell down the entire flight, broke her arm in 2 places.
Surgery.
Photos of her injuries. Her arm bent at a wrong angle, covered in bruises. It made me sick. Jake claimed it was an accident. She tripped. His lawyer argued anger management issues. Probation, anger management classes. His ex got a 2-year restraining order, but she moved to a different state to get away. This wasn't an isolated incident. He'd done this before. He would do it again. I kept searching. Found a local group on Facebook, Safe Dating Network, where people posted warnings. I joined, searched Jake's name. 3 different posts, 3 different women. All described the same pattern. Charm, then jealousy, control, then violence. One woman, he punched a hole in her wall, through her phone. When she tried to leave, he blocked the door for hours. The second, he showed up at 2 a.m., demanding to know where she'd been. Kicked her door, cracked the frame. The third, he harassed her at work, got fired. A week later, all 4 of her tires were slashed. She knew it was him. All 3 women said Jake blamed stress or mental health problems. All 3 said he was calculating, manipulative, not impulsive. I screenshotted all 3 posts, saved them. The next morning, I composed an email to Constance Burnett, the district attorney handling Jake's assault case against the bartender. I attached the screenshots, the court documents from his ex's restraining order. I explained I was the person who'd filed the recent restraining order, that Jake had a pattern of targeting women, using violence, then blaming it on medical conditions. The bartender wasn't an isolated incident. I hit send. 2 hours later, she responded. Thanked me, said it was extremely helpful. Evidence of pattern behavior would strengthen their case. She said my evidence showed Jake's violence was calculated, repeated, not impulsive. She asked if I'd testify. Yes, absolutely. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. Madison. A long, rambling text. I was obsessed with destroying Jake. I needed mental health help. I was spreading lies. Real friends would support her relationship. I was jealous. Couldn't stand seeing her happy. Jake was getting sicker in jail, and if anything happened to him, it would be my fault. The whole message was unhinged. I didn't respond. I screenshotted it, added it to my evidence folder. Showed it to Officer Conway. He read it, asked if she'd sent any others. No, just this one. Probably not enough to press charges, he said, but I should document everything. He suggested I block her. I said I wanted to keep the line open, in case she sent something more serious. He understood. Smart thinking. A few days later, Haley and I met Rick in his office. He explained Madison was legally responsible for her portion of the rent until the lease ended in 8 months. If she stopped paying, we'd be responsible. He suggested we start looking for a roommate. What if Madison came back? Legally, she still had the right. But he had documented Jake's ban. If she brought Jake back, he could start eviction proceedings. It was complicated and messy. Haley and I left, stressed. We posted an ad for a roommate right away. That same week, I started noticing a dark green sedan with tinted windows parked across the street. Tuesday evening, there. Wednesday morning, still there. Wednesday evening, still. Thursday morning, gone. Thursday evening, back. I started taking photos from my window, zooming in on the license plate. Sent them to Officer Conway. He said he'd run the plates. An hour later, he called. The car was registered to Derek Caldwell, who lived on the other side of town. Derek had 2 arrests for assault, 1 for drug possession. He was friends with Jake on social media, worked together at the warehouse. Derek was probably watching my apartment for Jake. Officer Conway said he'd visit Derek, warn him. The next day, Conway called again. He'd confronted Derek. Derek claimed he was visiting a friend. Conway warned him that repeated parking could be stalking, harassment, especially given his connection to Jake. If he was seen near my apartment again, he'd be arrested. Derek got nervous, promised he wouldn't. The car hadn't been back. I thanked him, but I felt paranoid now. Every time I walked to my car, came home, I looked around constantly. I varied my schedule, parked in different spots. The whole situation made me hyper-aware, anxious. I couldn't relax. I bought pepper spray. I felt like I was living in constant fear, and I hated it. Jake's bail hearing happened 3 days later. I sat in the back row, trying to look calm, heart pounding. Jake was brought in, orange jumpsuit cuffed. His eyes scanned the courtroom, landing on me for a second. His lawyer, Marshall DeWitt, shuffled papers. Constance Burnett, the prosecutor, looked no nonsense. The judge, an older black man, looked tired. Constance went first. Jake violated bail by coming to my apartment, a documented pattern of intimidating witnesses. Mrs. Alemon, his ex-girlfriend's restraining order, the bartender assault. Jake posed a clear danger. Marshall stood up, immediately talking about Jake's mental health. Anger management disorder, a legitimate medical condition requiring treatment, not incarceration. Keeping him in jail would prevent him from getting therapy, medication. He made it sound cruel, inhumane. Jake wasn't a flight risk, would comply with any conditions. The judge listened without expression. Then he looked at the file, reading through police reports. Silence, except for rustling papers. Finally, he looked up. Denied bail. Jake clearly violated previous release conditions, showed a pattern of threatening behavior toward multiple people, including an elderly neighbor. Restraining order. Pending assault charge. Too much of a risk. Jake's face went red. He started to stand, but the bailiff pushed him back down. Marshall tried to argue, but the judge cut him off. Decision final. Then Jake turned and stared directly at me. His eyes were full of pure hatred, trying to burn a hole through my skull. His mouth twisted into an ugly sneer, fists clenching even with the cuffs on. The bailiff noticed, stepped closer to Jake, blocking his view. They led Jake out through a side door. He kept his head turned, looking over his shoulder until the door closed. I sat there for a minute, legs shaky. Constance came over. "Are you okay?" I nodded. "Thank you." She said it was the right outcome. I should feel safer. But I didn't. I felt like Jake's stare was still boring into the back of my head. That evening, Madison's phone buzzed. A long text. I was responsible for Jake being locked up like an animal. His mental health was getting worse. The jail didn't have therapists for his condition. If anything happened to him, it would be my fault. I'd live with the guilt. She called me selfish, cruel, said I was using the legal system to punish someone for being sick. I had destroyed her relationship, ruined Jake's chance at recovery. I was no better than people who locked up the mentally ill in asylums. She hoped I was happy. I read the whole thing twice, stomach twisting. Part of me wanted to text back, explain again. Jake wasn't sick, he was dangerous, violent. But I knew it wouldn't matter. Madison had convinced herself Jake was the victim. I was the villain. Nothing would change her mind. I screenshotted the messages, sent them to Officer Conway. He called. Harassment? Potentially. But not enough to press charges. One message, even long, wasn't enough for a pattern. He suggested I block her. I hesitated. Maybe I wanted to see if she'd text again. Or maybe I just wasn't ready to cut off someone who used to be my friend. 2 days later, I was making dinner. My phone rang, unknown number. I almost didn't answer. A woman's voice. "Is this you?" "Yes." She introduced herself as Isla Terrell. The name didn't register until she said, "I'm the bartender Jake assaulted." My whole body went tense. I sat down. Isla said she'd heard I filed a restraining order. She wanted to thank me for standing up to him. She'd been terrified to testify. Knowing others spoke out made her feel less alone, more confident. I told her I was sorry. Jake was dangerous. Isla was quiet for a second. "Could we meet for coffee?" She wanted to talk to someone who understood Jake's threats. I agreed. The cafe was one of those quirky places. I got there first, ordered a latte. Isla arrived 5 minutes later. I recognized her from the police report photos. Shorter than I expected, dark hair in a ponytail, a slight limp. She ordered coffee, then sat across from me. Small talk, then she took a deep breath. She told me about the night Jake attacked her. Friday evening, busy bar. Jake came in alone, started friendly, but kept ordering drinks. By his 8th beer, he was loud, aggressive. Isla cut him off. He instantly changed, yelling, calling her names. She tried to stay calm, professional. Then Jake jumped over the bar.
So fast.
1 second yelling, the next, he was right in front of her, fist raised. He punched her in the face. She fell backward into liquor bottles. He kept hitting her while she was on the ground. Other bartenders pulled him off, but not before he broke her nose. Gave her a concussion. Isla touched her face. A slight asymmetry. Headaches, nerve damage, hard to smile properly. Jake's lawyer, Marshall, contacted her weeks later, tried to convince her to drop charges. Claimed mental health crisis, anger management disorder, getting treatment. Made it sound cruel to press charges. Isla refused. Permanent nerve damage, chronic pain. Jake knew exactly what he was doing. He waited until she was alone behind the bar. If it was truly an uncontrollable episode, he would have lashed out at anyone. But he targeted her specifically. She was determined to testify. Jake needed consequences. 2 weeks later, my full restraining order hearing. The temporary one was only good for 14 days. Jake appeared on video from jail, angry, defiant. Marshall sat in the courtroom. The judge was the same one from the bail hearing. I sat with Constance Burnett. Marshall argued the restraining order was unnecessary. Jake was incarcerated. Once released, he'd attend therapy, anger management. Claimed the order was based on misunderstandings. Jake never threatened me directly. My face got hot listening to him twist everything.
When it was my turn, I walked to the witness stand.
Constance asked me to describe Jake's behavior. I told the judge about the threats in my apartment, his clenched fists. How he intimidated Mrs. Aleman, whispered, "This isn't over." About Derek's car, confirmed surveillance. Madison's threatening texts. The constant fear of Jake planning revenge. The judge listened, took notes. Constance asked if I had anything else. I am genuinely afraid of what Jake will do when he eventually gets out. Marshall tried to cross-examine. Had Jake ever explicitly said he would hurt me? No, but his behavior and body language made his intentions clear. Marshall said that wasn't enough. The judge cut him off. He'd heard enough. Based on my testimony, documented evidence, Jake's pattern of behavior, he was granting a 1-year restraining order. Extended to include Jake's known associates. Marshall objected. Decision final. When I got home, Haley was on the couch, upset.
She needed to tell me something.
She'd been thinking about everything. Even though Jake was in jail, the whole situation made her too anxious. Nightmares about Jake breaking in. She couldn't relax, couldn't focus on classes. She decided to move out at the end of the semester, live with her boyfriend. I told her I understood completely. The apartment stopped feeling safe weeks ago. I couldn't fault her. Haley looked relieved. We hugged. We'd stay friends, but things would never be the same. Jake had ruined everything. The victim advocate's office. Fluorescent lights buzzed. The woman explained Jake's trial was in 6 weeks. With bail violation, plus my evidence, they were confident. Constance Burnett was building a strong case. Jake deliberately targeted women, used the mental health excuse to manipulate. The advocate walked me through the trial. I'd probably be called to testify. My documentation was incredibly helpful. I left feeling slightly better, but also terrified about facing Jake in court. 3 days later, I was home alone when someone knocked. Through the peephole, Madison. She looked terrible. Hair messy, dark circles, clothes looked like she'd been wearing them for days. My first instinct was not to open, but she looked so defeated. I unlocked the door, chain on. "What do you want?" Her voice was quiet, shaky. "Can we talk?" I told her Jake wasn't allowed anywhere near.
She knew, she said.
She was alone. I kept my phone ready to dial 911. Let her in. Madison walked to the couch, sat in Jake's old spot. I stayed near the door. She looked around, tears filling her eyes. She started crying before she even spoke. She wiped her face. Jake's friend kicked her out. She couldn't pay rent. Nowhere else to go. Her parents weren't answering. All her other friends stopped talking to her months ago. She looked at me, eyes red and swollen. I'm starting to think maybe Jake wasn't who I thought he was. I wanted to say, no kidding, but she looked so broken. She admitted living with Jake's friend had been awful. The friend kept saying Jake talked about her behind her back, that he'd done the same to other girlfriends. She'd been sleeping in her car for 2 nights. Part of me wanted to tell her it was her own fault. But another part remembered. We used to be friends. I told Madison she could stay in her room, temporarily. But 2 conditions. She needed to start seeing a therapist and she had to cut off all contact with Jake. No calls, no letters, no visits. She nodded. She would do both. She was sorry for everything. She looked genuinely sorry, but I'd seen her lie so many times. This is your last chance, I told her. If you bring Jake back into our lives in any way, you're out, permanently. Madison promised she understood. She went to her room. I heard her crying for hours. Over the next week, Madison barely came out. She looked like a ghost. Slept most of the day, cried randomly. Haley came back, shocked to see Madison. I explained, said we needed to give her a chance. One night, around 2 a.m., I got up for water. Madison was sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, crying. I turned on the light. Are you okay? Of course, she wasn't. She looked up. Jake's friend had told her Jake was cheating on her the whole time. Showed her texts between Jake and at least 3 other women. Jake called Madison crazy, said he was only with her because she was easy to manipulate. Madison put her head in her hands and sobbed. She defended him, pushed away everyone who cared about her. And the whole time, he was laughing at her. I sat down. Let her cry. She started talking about how Jake slowly cut her off from other friends. He'd get upset when she made plans without him, accuse her friends of not understanding their relationship. She realized now he'd been isolating her on purpose. Jake used to tell her her family didn't really love her. Only he understood. He convinced her everyone else was ableist, discriminatory. She needed to protect him. Madison looked at me, an expression of complete horror. She finally understood. The mental health condition excuse was just a way for Jake to control her, make her defend his violence. She felt stupid. I told her she wasn't stupid. Abusers like Jake were experts at finding vulnerable people. I suggested a counselor specializing in domestic violence. She immediately got defensive. She wasn't being abused. Jake never hit her. I chose my words carefully. Psychological abuse, manipulation, were real forms of abuse. What she described was textbook emotional abuse. Madison sat quiet for a long time. She never thought of it that way, because Jake always said he was the victim. She asked how to find a counselor. I'd help her. Madison went to her first counseling appointment the following week. Came back shaken. Sat on the couch, staring into space. I asked how it went. The counselor helped her see all the ways Jake manipulated and controlled her. Walked her through the relationship timeline, pointed out red flags she'd ignored. Told her about Darvo. Deny, attack, reverse, victim, offender. Jake used that exact pattern. She felt incredibly stupid. I told her she wasn't stupid. Abusers were experts. Madison asked if I thought she was a bad person for enabling Jake. No, but she needed to take responsibility for the harm she'd caused. She nodded. 6 weeks later, Jake's trial. I testified first. How Jake threatened me, his clenched fists, intimidating Mrs. Alemon. The whispered threat. The constant fear, Jake's friend watching my apartment, Madison's threatening texts. The jury watched closely. Some looked angry. Then Isla took the stand. Described the night Jake attacked her. Cutting him off after 8 drinks. His yelling, calling her names. Jumping over the bar. Punching her in the face. falling backward. Other staff pulling him off. Broken nose, concussion, nerve damage. Still numbness. Several jurors looked uncomfortable. One woman had tears in her eyes. Marshall tried to argue anger management disorder. But Constance presented evidence. Jake's behavior was calculated, not impulsive. Texts where Jake planned confrontations, bragged about manipulating. Multiple restraining orders, targeting women. Someone with a genuine impulse control disorder wouldn't plan and execute manipulation, or choose victims strategically. It was clear. Jake knew exactly what he was doing. The jury came back after 3 hours. I held my breath. Guilty on all counts of aggravated assault. Jake's face went red. He started yelling that we all conspired against him. The system was rigged. Everyone was discriminating. Bailiffs had to restrain him as he screamed threats at the judge and jury. Madison sat next to me, crying quietly. I squeezed her hand. Even though he deserved this, watching someone completely lose control was scary. The judge banged his gavel, set sentencing for 2 weeks later, ordered Jake removed. Jake fought the bailiffs, still screaming. Marshall looked defeated. 2 weeks later, Madison and I walked into the courthouse for Jake's sentencing. She'd been going to therapy twice a week, looked different. More aware. We sat in the back. Jake was brought in thinner, dark circles. The judge reviewed the case. Prior restraining orders, pattern of violence against women, complete lack of remorse. 3 years in state prison, mandatory anger management, 5 years probation after release. All restraining orders permanent. Jake just stared straight ahead. Madison started crying, but this time, it felt different. Like she was mourning the person she thought Jake was. The bailiffs led Jake away. He didn't look at us. Didn't make threats. Just walked out, checked out. Outside, Isla was waiting. She ran over, hugged me tight. I finally feel safe. Her face had healed, but you could still see the slight asymmetry. She'd started a support group for other women Jake had targeted. Asked if Madison and I wanted to join. Madison nodded yes before I could even answer. Isla hugged Madison. I'm proud of you for getting out and getting help. We exchanged numbers. The group met every Thursday. Walking back to my car, this weird mix of relief and exhaustion. Like I'd been holding my body tense for months and could finally relax, but didn't quite remember how. That Thursday, Madison and I drove to the community center. 6 other women sat in a circle. Isla introduced us. Everyone shared their names, how they knew Jake. The first woman talked about Jake isolating her. The second, how he got fired for threatening her. One by one, each woman told her story. All followed the same pattern. Charming at first, then controlling, then violent. Always excuses. Always blamed victims. Madison listened, tears running down her face. She realized she wasn't special. Jake used the exact same tactics on all of them. When it was Madison's turn, she apologized for defending Jake, for enabling his behavior. The other women were kind. Several said they'd done the same. Isla reminded us, Jake's manipulation wasn't our fault. Recognizing the pattern was the first step to healing. The next weekend, Madison's parents visited. We had the most honest conversation they'd probably ever had. Madison's dad apologized for not seeing the signs, said he'd failed as a father. Madison's mom was harder to read, still made comments about Jake seeming nice, mental health being complicated. But when Madison's dad pushed back, she finally admitted she'd been in denial. They agreed to family therapy. Before they left, Madison's dad pulled me aside. Thank you for not giving up on Madison. He said most people would have written her off. Monday morning, I met Rick. He knew Jake was in prison. Rick said he'd let Madison stay on the lease for the rest of the semester, since she was getting help. Haley had called, asking if it was safe to come back. I told Rick Madison was completely different. Rick made notes. He'd reach out to Haley. Walking back, I felt grateful Rick had been so supportive. With the Jake situation resolved, I could focus on finishing my semester. My grades had started improving. I nearly failed 2 classes during midterms. My professors were understanding. Now I was catching up, enjoying classes again. My psychology professor, Even asked if I'd share my experience next semester. I'd think about it. Madison started volunteering with the local domestic violence organization, became a peer counselor, helping others recognize manipulation, deal with their guilt. She said it was part of her healing. 3 months after Jake's sentencing, Madison sat me down. She'd been accepted to transfer to a different college next semester. Near her parents, a fresh start. She looked nervous, but I told her it made sense. She'd already talked to Rick, broken the lease early. We spent weeks packing her room. Haley decided to come back, take Madison's room. On Madison's last day, we took photos, promised to stay in touch. But we both knew our friendship would never be what it was before Jake. Some things just break people apart. Isla's support group kept growing. They lobbied the local bar association, implemented better security training. Panic buttons installed. The changes wouldn't undo what happened to us, but they might prevent the next Jake from hurting someone else. One afternoon, Mrs. Alemon knocked, holding a plate of chocolate chip cookies. "Thank you for making the building safe again," she said, eyes watery. She'd been terrified, jumped at every sound.
She squeezed my hand.
"A lot of people would have just moved out, but you did the right thing." After she left, I sat eating cookies, a weird mix of proud and sad. Standing up to Jake was necessary, but it had also cost me a friendship that would never fully recover. On our last day living together, Madison, Haley, and I ordered pizza. The conversation was awkward at first, but eventually we started talking honestly. Madison apologized again. Her therapist helped her understand she'd been so desperate to feel needed that she convinced herself Jake's problems made her special. Haley admitted she was scared to push back harder. And I wished I'd involved Rick and the police sooner. We all agreed to stay in touch, but acknowledged our friendship would never be what it was before Jake. Some things just break people apart. Spring semester started. I moved into a new apartment across campus with 2 roommates I'd carefully vetted. Olivia and Jess were quiet, respectful. Boring compared to the drama, but boring was exactly what I needed. I made sure our lease had clear guest policies, told them upfront about Jake. They understood, appreciated a roommate who took safety seriously. A year later, I'm doing really well in my classes, working part-time with the Victim Advocacy Program, helping other people navigate the legal system, connecting them with resources. It feels good to use what I learned to help others. Madison is doing well at her new school, dating someone respectful. Isla's bar implemented the new safety protocols, no major incidents since. Jake is still in prison for another 2 years. We've all moved forward. Stronger, wiser. We use that knowledge to help protect others. Have you ever been stuck in a situation where you knew someone was dangerous, but others were too blinded to see it? What would you have done differently? I really want to hear your thoughts in the comments below.